Right, and we'll get going. So thank you for joining us for this Accessible Trails discussion part 2. I'm Mariah Fogg, the Community Conservation Manager for the Berkshire Natural Resources Council, and I'm joined tonight by Charlotte Hood, the Volunteer and Outreach Assistant with BNRC. She'll be lending some support behind the scenes tonight, and our presenters, Tyler Fogg, Peter Jensen, and Jed Talbot. Before passing the mic to our presenters, I wanted to just share briefly how BNRC came to be hosting this discussion. For those of you who aren't familiar, BNRC is a regional land trust working throughout Berkshire County in Western Massachusetts on land conservation, land stewardship, and community engagement. In 2018, the organization was thrilled to open an accessible trail, actually built by Peter at Jensen Associates, called Parsons Marsh in Lenox. It was the first such trail that our organization had developed and also built. And we had massive community support throughout the process, and the trail opening really resulted in a lot of attention from people locally and far beyond. So skipping ahead just a little bit, the trail remains a valuable community resource, and we've since built another accessible trail along the way. And we had some takeaways we'd like to share. First is that we're still learning about accessible trails. One piece of that is the deep need for more accessible woodland trails in our community and beyond. Another is that partnerships are essential in the learning process. And we feel that we do have a role to play in sharing our learning about these vital trails and spreading the word. So this online sharing and learning program tonight is a direct result of these takeaways, and we're really grateful for our experts here and to all of you who are here to learn more along with us. So another result that I just wanted to briefly highlight is BNRC's new Accessible Trails brochure called the Berkshire County Trails for All. It's available in English and Spanish and was developed really in response to needs suggested by community members and our partners, with the goal of creating a resource both online and in print that can guide Berkshire residents and visitors to some of the accessible trails in the area. And within this brochure, each trail has a comprehensive and consistent description that gives enough information for a user to decide if the trail might be a good fit for them before they visit. I can share the brochure in our follow-up email as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. This evening's program is part 2 of a 3-part online learning program. And part 1 included the importance of accessible trails and the considerations for wayfinding and information sharing. In part 3, taking place later this year, we're going to be focusing on the considerations for funding and how to have a project ready. But tonight we're going to hear about trail design, construction, modification, maintenance, all related to accessible trails. We do have a time for a Q&A at the end, so please hold your questions until then, or also if you just need to write them down so you don't forget, you can input them into the Q&A. That would be the preferred route versus the chat as we go. So now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. We have Peter S. Jensen. He's a trail planner and builder with more than 45 years of experience planning and constructing pedestrian trails throughout the northeastern United States. In the late 1990s, he served as the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's representative to the U.S. Access Board's Regulatory Negotiation Committee on Accessibility Guidelines for Outdoor Developed Areas, where he helped shape guidelines for the development of new trails, camping facilities, picnic sites, and beaches. Peter S. Jensen and Associates, LLC has been a member of the Professional Trail Builders Association since 2001, and Peter spent 9 years on the PTA board and 3 as president. Next, we have Jed Talbot, the owner of OBP Trailworks, LLC, who has over 2 decades of trail planning, maintenance, and construction experience. He has facilitated over 125 workshops and successfully completed over 150 trail contracts for private, federal, municipal, volunteer, and nonprofit groups since 2004. Jed is a board member and past president of the Professional Trail Builders Association, a board member of the World Trails Network, a member of the Maine Recreational Trails Program Advisory Committee, a certified logging professional, and a certified erosion control specialist. And lastly, we have Tyler Fogg, who has been building and maintaining trails since 2011, starting in the Conservation Corps world and moving to the National Park Service, where he worked on trails at Acadia National Park, also spending time with the Historic Preservation Training Center. Since 2019, he's worked at BNRC, managing and improving trails in Berkshire County, as well as designing and building new trails. So thank you so much. We have a great program for you, and I will pass it over to Peter to begin the discussion with trail design.
Thank you, Mariah. And I should also add that I'm actually based in Vermont, because I don't think the bios mentioned that. I'm going to share my screen with my presentation here, so give me a moment. Okay, Mariah, is that visible for everyone?
Looking good. Yep.
Okay,
yep.
Great.
And you can get it into full screen.
Right.
At the top there under view. Yeah, there you go.
Great. Okay, so we're going to talk about for the next, say 20 minutes or so about sustainable trail design, also sometimes called all persons trails, also sometimes called accessible trails. They go by a number of different names. That's where I'm based out of, and work all over New England. So a couple things. First, we're going to talk about some background about the regulations, guidelines, standards around these types of trails. We're going to talk about some best practices in terms of the use of those, and get into some design and layout. So in terms of background, in the introduction there that Mariah gave, mentioned the U.S. Access Board, and it's the U.S. Access Board that that oversees the various regulatory pieces, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Architectural Barriers Act, and a variety of other federal legislation that has to do with accessibility. Everybody's familiar with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 1990, 91, in that era. The Architectural Barriers Act actually dates back from 1968. And that was something Congress passed that applied only to federal facilities. And the ADA applied to the rest of the country, but only in the built environment. So in 1997 through 99, I served on this regulatory negotiation committee where there was an effort to develop guidelines for outdoor developed areas. And we're just going to focus on the trails piece today. And there was a final report that was issued in September of 99. And over the following 4 years or so, the U.S. Forest Service ended up adopting them. And I'm not going to get into the detail as to why, but that is what's called FS-TAG, or Forest Service Trail Accessibility Guidelines. And that is currently what serves as sort of the best practices. And a lot of states and others, I know we as contractors, we use them, Jed uses them, and many other trail contractors use these guidelines for developing all persons trails. So I mentioned this thing about the ABA trail standards. These are also called the federal trail standards, and that's where you can actually locate the information specific to trails in the federal regulatory environment. And this is an important piece right here. I want to mention to everybody that there is no such thing as an ADA trail, because trails are not mentioned in the ADA law. I hear it all the time that folks refer to an ADA trail. Well, there's no such thing. It's a trail that would be built according to either the ABA trail standards or the Forest Service Trail Accessibility Guidelines. There's another term that you see there, ORR, Outdoor Recreation Access Route. That is something that you would find, for example, in a picnic area or a campground. And that has to do with, maneuvering, say, between picnic table and restroom and that type of thing. Okay, so moving on to the technical specifications within the Forest Service Trail Accessibility Guidelines. So there are these 10 factors that we worked on. One was surface, which is essentially, what you travel on, what you hike on. The tread width, the clear tread width, what's available for maneuvering along a trail. Trail slopes, which includes both the cross slope as well as the running slope. And we're going to focus on this aspect of it in a little bit. Rest intervals, passing spaces. One of the things about these guidelines is that you can have a trail that would meet the guidelines that's 36 inches wide. But in that case, you can't have two wheelchairs really passing each other. So that's why there's a requirement for passing spaces. Tread obstacles, we'll talk a little bit about those in a minute as well. Protruding objects. A lot of folks think these are things like, brush or trees, things like that, projecting into the path of travel. They really apply to things like signage. A really common one that I see are kiosk roof overhangs. This is where, the typical ADA guideline of 80 inches applies. So that was borrowed from the ADA to come into this. So that's something for you all to check on, is if you have kiosks with overhanging roofs, you want to make sure that you have 80-inch clearance there. Openings, of course, openings would be things like deck boards and boardwalks and bridges. Gates and barriers, being able to navigate around those or through those at the beginning of trails is also an important one. And signage, and the easiest thing I can point to here is the brochure that Mariah showed early on. That type of information is required on trailhead signage to give people the information that they need to make a decision as to whether they feel comfortable using that particular trail. So here's an example of a section of trail. It's the width is 5 feet. You can see it's clear. The grades or slopes all meet the requirements, both cross slope and running slope. The surface is firm and stable, another one of the requirements. And certainly there's no need for passing space because it is a 60-inch wide trail. So there's plenty of room for folks to navigate by each other. In terms of openings, here's an example of a boardwalk deck. You can see the openings, they have to be 1/2 inch or less. And protruding objects, typically what happens is that first deck board on a bridge or boardwalk, the surfacing, will either erode or compact if it's not properly constructed. And so that creates a lip. And the requirement there on built structures like this is that they'd be no more than 1/2 inch. The other requirement on built structures like this is the cross slope. That's reduced to a maximum of 2%. But I'm not really aware of any builder of a structure like this that would want to have it level from side to side. Okay, there are also these conditions for exception in the trail accessibility guidelines, and there are 4 of them. This is where it's not practicable due to terrain. So what it does is it provides all these 4 exceptions. They provide an out for certain pieces of these technical specifications. For example, you might be able to achieve the width all other 9 or 8 of of the treadway oriented specifications, but maybe you can't make the grade work because of the terrain. And so this is where there could be an exception to that. Fundamentally alter the function or the purpose. Best example I can give there is, say, for example, in an alpine area, having to import surfacing material because there's nothing else to use in that location. That would really alter the purpose of a trail in an alpine area. Prevailing construction practices, that really relates to, who's going to build the trail. Perhaps those that are going to build it, let's say a volunteer group, for example, they may not have the expertise to, drill and remove ledge or, that type of thing. So there is an exception in there for that as well. And then also precluded by cultural, historic, and for example, wetland issues. Classic one there would be, a boardwalk, for example. I know that we do a lot of work in Massachusetts, and with the Wetlands Protection Act, having the spacing in the deck boards so that light penetrates below the boardwalk for vegetation purposes. So that might be an exception in this particular category. There are also two general exceptions. I just highlighting those. I'm not going to get into those. There's a lot of information here. Generally speaking, this is a whole day class that I do, so there really isn't time to dive into this. So in terms of design and layout, we're going to look at some of the trail parameters, slopes and grades, process, and then also, the final aspects of putting a plan together. Objective purposes of the trail, the objective or purpose of the trail, destination, why are you having this trail? You also want to be thinking about, what kind of width you would like to have. And the type of surface. And certainly we want to build in sustainability as well. I'll talk more about that in a minute as well. And then who's going to build a trail? Is it going to be volunteers, staff, contractor, or some kind of hybrid combination of that? And the same thing goes for maintenance. That's another important aspect of this. So in terms of destination or purpose of the trail, are you trying to get up on top of a hill or a mountain? Are you trying to navigate around a wetland? What are the parameters that you're trying to figure out there? So important things in my mind are the width, the type of surface, running slopes, which includes the cross slope as well. And the cross slope is a 5% maximum. And then we start introducing, sustainability design, and that has to do with grade reversals. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So again, who's going to build the trail and maintain the trail? These are important considerations when you're making your decisions on moving forward. So slopes and grades, this is right out of the trail standards. You can go from 0 to 5% running slope, any distance. And then you've got the 5 to 8 1/3 up to 200 feet and so on and so forth. And you can see the distances get shorter as the grades increase. So there's a flaw in my presentation there. Sorry about that. Rest intervals. So there's a requirement for rest intervals at the bottom and top of what we call I don't know, 4%, and we've got to increase to 7.5%. That 4% section results in a rest space because it's 5% or less for at least 60 inches. And so once we get above that section of say 7.5%, we can't go to anything steeper, above the 8 1/3 without first going to a rest in that section. I'm probably losing a bunch of folks because this is getting pretty technical, but here's an example. So I just came up with a sample section, 4% for 55 feet, 7.5 for 23 feet. And there's a negative 6% for 9 feet. And then we go up again for 3% for 6 feet, 9.25% for 18 feet, and then down again 4%. So here's a situation where we have rest intervals at the first grade, in the first grade segment, because it's less than 5%. And we also have it in the third grade segment. Okay, you see that, the 3% for 6 feet. So the 6 feet's more than 5 feet, so that qualifies. And then in the fifth and sixth grade segments, we've got a plus 4%, and we've got a minus 4%. And those qualify as rest intervals as well. So you may wonder, why do we have some negatives in there? Well, those negatives are where we're creating grade reversals. And for example, in the third segment and the seventh segment, there's also potentially a rest in the transition from the 4% to the 7.5%, because of how from the 7.5% to the 6% that goes down, because you're coming up over the top, and there's an opportunity there to create a less than either of those grades as you're making that transition. Think of it as a curve, and if that can be about 5 foot or a hair longer, you can achieve your rest interval in that location. A lot of this work requires, bench cut, and I know Jed's going to talk more about that, but I wanted to give a quick example of that. So, but on to process, we lay out a flag line, typically using a clinometer, so we can get a rough idea of what's going on. Then we review that with the client. We modify the alignment if it's needed based on input, and then get into construction work logs and cost estimates, so that that's sort of in preparation for the creation of a trail plan and fundraising purposes. And the construction work log also helps in terms of information for permitting if any is needed. And then based on permitting, if that does occur, then there could be also additional modifications made due to permitting. Some of the field tools, between flagging tape, pin flags, depends on, the conditions, if it's open field versus woodland, a wheel for, doing the work logs, clinometer. I use an iPad for recording information. And then route marking, flagging, that can be done in a number of different ways. And I have a particular system that I use, which I won't get into at the moment. The other thing I wanted to mention was the science behind sustainability. Dr. Jeff Marion, who's down at Virginia Tech, and also one of our PTBA members, Jeremy Wimpy, they created this document after assessing the entire Appalachian National Scenic Trail and came up with information on sustainability. And basically this graphic here, pretty clearly illustrates that if you're going up, if you have a fall line trail, you're going to experience entrenchment. It doesn't matter how much cross slope you have, how many drainage structures you put in, that type of thing. You're going to end up with entrenchment. So that's where we're really looking at more of the side hill located trails to alleviate the potential for erosion. Here's another graphic that I use just to illustrate. The vertical line is the fall line, and the level just shows the contour or the angle of the treadway that you could have. So in the left photo, if that's a fall, silver rod is going straight up. Whereas if we have on the right, we're using the half rule. So that's half of the prevailing slope. For example, if you have a slope of 15%, your maximum grade should be 7.5. So here's an example of laying out using grade stakes, which you sometimes have to do on these types of trails, in order to raise the treadway up to make grades work. In this particular case here, it would be to get by this particular pine tree on the left. It would also help protect its roots. And that's pretty much, the goal is to create trails that, for the most part, lie lightly upon the land, and provide, trail users with a positive experience, and, get as many folks into the wooded door landscape as possible, whether it's wooded or through open meadow. There's a lot of synergy in creating trails like this, with input from community groups, and people love it. And I always abide by the adage, build it and they will come. And I think those of you out there who have built these types of trails can attest to that. And I believe that's all I've got at this point. So thank you for your attention.
Great, thanks so much, Peter. I just want to let you know, I did end up turning your video off. You were lagging a little bit, and I think that helped, but feel free to turn it back on.
Oh, okay.
All right, get the next presentation up. And welcome, Jed. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. We're going to talk a little bit about the construction process here. I see a bunch of familiar faces or names of faces that are familiar on this webinar, so it's nice to be a part of this group. My information wasn't in the bio as well about my location, but my business is based in Maine. However, I used to work for Peter's company and spent a lot of time in the Berkshires, and had quite a bit of time on BNRC trails years ago. So it's nice to see be back involved. So I think Peter set the stage very well for a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. I'm basically going to try to lay out the construction process in 10 quote unquote easy steps. Anybody who's been involved with the trail project realizes there's way more than 10 steps, and none of them are particularly easy, but we'll try to sort of simplify the concepts enough without being too broad, and try not to get in the proverbial weeds too deeply. So we can go next slide. So we'll just talk really quickly about the anatomy of an accessible trail before we get into the construction. This is sort of a basic diagram that shows what a typical accessible trail might look like. Moving sort of from left to right on the screen, you can see the original grade, that's the landscape, and then the undisturbed soil around the trail itself that's been excavated out. We start with a crushed rock base, and that's not always the case. You see it's listed as 0 inches to 24 inches. Sometimes you don't have to put the crushed rock in. That's basically drainage stone. It's like generally 1.5 to 2 inches as a max size, but it can go a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. It doesn't have fines in it, so it lets water pass through it. So if you're in wetter environments and areas where water is percolating through, seeping, or there's any sort of subterranean flow, you generally want to put in crushed rock. However, it's not always necessary, and in a lot of environments, it's not needed at all. So sometimes that layer is eliminated. Then you've got some geotextile fabric, and then we have on top of that what's shown as our compacted surfacing matrix. And that's 4 to 6 inches as an absolute minimum. Oftentimes it ends up being more than that. And this is also, I said, a little bit of a simplification. Sometimes we put in another layer in there of like slightly larger gravel, like what people generally refer to as 3/4 inch minus gravel. It's usually less expensive and it packs really well. And then we just use that surfacing matrix sort of in your top. Absolute minimum 2 inches, but usually we go 3, 4, or 5 or so inches of that surfacing matrix. We'll talk a little bit more about what that matrix is a little bit later. You see, we've removed our organic material from where we have our aggregate installed, and a lot of that is utilized on the trail edges when possible. Sort of the darker area to the right of the screen, you see the topsoil and excess excavated organic sort of feathered out to the trail edge. Okay, next slide. So step one in constructing an accessible trail is the initial design and layout. It's almost like a feasibility study of whether or not it is prudent or feasible to build this type of trail on the parcel that you have. So usually that's going out with clinometers to measure the grades, doing a lot of scouting, running around, and using, that clinometer is a device that the person in the photo on the left is using. It's an instrument that measures grades and slopes. And then the one on the right is just an app that I have on my phone called Theodolite that also does a similar thing, not quite as accurate, but it's nice to be able to take snapshots and get a good idea of the basic lay of the land. So after that initial scouting and design assessment, you can say, yep, we're going to move forward, or maybe this isn't the area to build an accessible trail. If you are going to go forward, oh, sorry, I started. Go to the next slide, please. We get into a more refined layout process. And I think Peter showed a really nice slide of that had grade stakes and string lines and an piece of angled aluminum with a level on it. That's kind of what we're doing here. If you look at this hillside, we're trying to go up the hill without going up a fall line alignment like Peter was talking about. And we had some grade issues, so we had to sweep our turns. And so we lay out our stakes, our grade stakes, along alignment that works so that you actually mark with like a Sharpie marker or something, the actual level of the grade, the finished trail grade on each one of these stakes. And you can put a string between them if you'd like. And then that helps guide the excavation process and the filling process, the amount that you put, excess excavated organic on the sides, how much you build up the trail, or how much you have to entrench the trail on the landscape to achieve the final grades that you're looking for. Slide. We sometimes also use flagging tape, not in the traditional sense of the way we often mark trail corridors or hiking trails, but we'll actually flag out areas not to be disturbed or areas to be disturbed on the other hand. This is a project we're working with a landscape architect, and they were really interested in preserving these sort of islands of vegetation. So we basically wrapped them with tape and made sure that nothing was getting touched inside those areas. Slide. And then if grades aren't an issue, like when you're moving through a fairly level field, we'll just use pin flags, wire stake flags, as they're sometimes known. And that way you can set the width, you know exactly where you're excavating to. And the depth can vary a little bit and won't be, necessarily too problematic. And you get a really good idea of where your trail is going to be. Leave a little bit less wiggle room up to the excavator operator. We usually put those flags about every 5 or 6 feet when we're doing it. We call it tight flagging. Slide. Okay, step 2. Opening up the corridor, clearing out the corridor. It's usually work if it's done primarily with chainsaws, pole saws, brush saws, hand saws to a certain degree. So basically clearing out the large woody debris. And sometimes this creates a real big mess, and sometimes it's really time intensive and labor intensive. You can see the picture on the right. There's a lot of large trees that had to go to build this accessible trail. So we have to deal with logs, the slash, the smaller trees, and we'll talk about some of the processes there. And then we're going to have to get rid of the stumps later. Slide. You can see the picture on the left. We're going through some pretty nasty invasives. So we had to utilize some equipment to cut through that. The slide on the right is much more conducive to opening up a trail corridor, and it was done primarily with pole saws and hand saws. Next. Then we have to prepare the trail bed for excavation. Although this step isn't 100% necessary, it results in a much better overall process. I utilize everything as a resource out there when we're building trails. And so we try to utilize everything that we possibly can. And so I call it rearranging nature. A lot of times we're just really rearranging what we have in front of us. So we'll take all of that nice leaf litter, light organic matter, and we'll either rake it off. Well, we'll start by cutting as low as possible. Sometimes that's why we bring in the brush saws. And then we will use rakes or a leaf blower to blow it off the trail, either into piles or into some organized fashion where we can utilize it later for the naturalization process. It works as mulch and also as a great way to naturalize. We'll see some photos of that in a little bit. Slide. Okay, when we're working through fields, we often mow as low as we possibly can to the ground with mowers, blow all that grass off, and then we use what's called a power box rake, or better known as a Harley rake, to masticate the soil. So instead of having these sort of root mats, these large vegetative mats, we sort of turn it up into a really nice loamy mix that has all the seed source in it. I think you can click on a short little video here. Oh, it's loud. I guess I can't talk over it. Fortunately, it's short. Okay. So that shows how we masticate the soil. Yeah, I can just skip to the next one, Mariah. That's fine. This is another one. You don't have to play the video. It's more of the same. It basically makes the trail bed into a very workable, maneuverable, malleable loam full of seed source. And so we open up the corridor wider than we need for the actual trail tread so that we can feather our edges in during the excavation process. Next slide. It is. So step 4 is to excavate and remove the organic layer. So ideally, when we're building accessible trails, we get rid of the entire organic layer and we're building off of mineral soil, or sometimes ledge, bedrock. But sometimes that's a little bit more difficult than in other places. Sometimes there's a really deep organic layer, and sometimes it's really thin. You know, we work in all different environments. So these slides show two very, very different environments. One's a very sandy soil in a field, and another one's a pretty loamy mesic soil in forested landscape. But we've gotten basically down to mineral soil on both. One of the main differences is if you look at the picture on the left, because there isn't a large watershed where we're building that trail, there's not a lot of water running onto that trail. We're actually elevating the trail up and shedding water on both sides. So the trail is going to be sort of that highest point on the landscape. So you can see we've utilized all the excess excavated organic right on the sides of the trail. The picture on the right, because the water is moving across the landscape and over our trail and down, if we just mound that organic soil on the edges of the trail, it's going to block up water. So we actually removed all of that organic matter away from the trail bed and hauled it off. Next slide. There's another example of a similar project where you're utilizing some of it on the edges and hauling some of it away. Next slide. And we utilize these cool little track dump trucks oftentimes. We fill them up with all that excavated stuff that we, whether it's the stumps or the organic matter, and haul it off site. Next slide. This just gives you a little bit of an idea of how much stuff we actually remove before we start bringing in the aggregate to build a trail. The picture on the left is basically what we call our stump dump. That's all of our stumps that we yanked out. You can see how large that pile is relative to the excavator. This is about over less than half a mile of accessible trail. And the picture on the right is all of the slash, all of the limbs and small diameter trees. We had another pile for firewood that we gave away locally. This was a project where we were hemmed in on all sides. So we actually had to remove all the organic mass. We couldn't just drag the slash off into the woods, which is often what we prefer to do, and leave the biomass in the woods. We generally don't chip in the woods, but occasionally we'll disperse chips. But generally we try to leave our slash in the woods whenever possible. That's the small diameter trees and the branches. Slide. Step 5, building crossings, if you have any. If you have short little boardwalk sections or bridges or even box culverts, usually this is the time when we construct those. Even though we haven't brought much in for aggregate, we've got everything excavated. We need to be able to move machines back and forth across the trail. So we build our bridges. We usually don't put our railings on at this point. We generally cover our bridges with our boardwalks with plywood and continue to drive over them. We do all the rock work that's necessary around the sides, it's cribbing work, and then we just continue to utilize them. So when you do it this way, you need to make sure that your bridges and boardwalks are designed to be able to handle the loads of your machinery going over and back and forth. So oftentimes we have to build our bridges bigger than what they would need to for pedestrian traffic, just for maintenance and construction. Next slide. Another shot of a crossing. You can see this is a very wet area that dumped out into a retention pond. This is behind a school. And we had to build that crossing immediately, basically to preserve the runoff from the field. And so we weren't adding any sediment to this pond. Next shot. Just an example of a small box culvert. It's a really easy way to get water from one side of the trail to the other without building really big structures. We do a lot of these. We've been doing a lot more of them in recent years. Just easy little box culverts. Next slide. Next step is to fill the sub base, install any culverts, or do other sort of rock-based structures as needed, such as crib walls, retaining walls, that sort of thing. So the sub base is that larger drainage stone, and that in areas that are going to take a lot of fill. So we want to build that stuff up first, and then we can lay our geotextile fabric on and bring in the next layer. You'll notice with our culverts, when you put your culvert in, you also want to build your headers, your wings, you're basically the inlets and the outlet structures for a culvert. You want to make sure that you're bearing your culverts well. And we like to try to dress them up with some decent rock work around them, such that you won't actually see the plastic culvert or metal if you use a metal culvert at all. When you utilize the trail, you just see the stones. Next slide. More examples of drainage stones with the geotextile fabric going over it. We generally use a 4-ounce non-woven, a perforated geotextile fabric, similar to they call it a 140N or equivalent. Next slide. More examples of crushed rock going in before the rest of the trail elements are constructed. You see we're doing the picture on the left, we're actually building the rock work as we're filling with the crushed rock. We're building over ledge in this particular location. So anywhere we build over ledge, we always by default fill with crushed rock first, because water follows bedrock and ledge. And so you're always going to get water flowing underneath your trail if you're building over ledge. So you want to do what you can to mitigate that by putting in as much crushed rock as humanly possible generally. Next slide. And then you fill and compact your base. You can see this is a pretty deep trail we're building. It's actually probably about 14 or 16 inches of aggregate. So we like to compact it in lifts no greater than 6 inches at a time. So you'll lay about 6 inches of material. We'll rake it out roughly. You don't have to be too perfect with it. And then we compact it, and then we lay another 6 inches, compact it, lay another 6 inches, etc. You can also see our grade stakes here with our fill lines. So they're off the excavated trail. So you can just use a level and go off of your markers to make sure that you're filling to the right height. And those grade stakes will stay until the very last filler trail is finished. Next slide. Here's just a shot of filling some of the base with one of our machines. I think it's like a 4-second video. If you click play, Mariah. Very exciting. Next slide. All right, then we started installing the top coat. So that's that surfacing matrix we were discussing before. And as we install that top coat, we're really checking our grades with what we call smart levels, digital levels, to make sure they're still fitting what we want, what we need to do. And we're starting to feather that organic material along the edges and bring everything in. We're also doing a lot of handwork, clipping all the roots by hand, with hand pruners. Next slide. And being really particular about our edges, where the interface of where our imported aggregate meets our, organic material, I think is really important for a beautiful, aesthetically beautiful trail. And it also, the more you focus on that, the more you focus the way water comes onto your trail and off your trail. So it serves two purposes. The trail on the right, you can see, we'll be talking about drainage a little bit. We purposefully aligned that trail right on the edge of that grade break because it was really easy to shed water off of it. Next slide. The picture on the left, you can see that top coat being compacted in the background, and in the foreground, you can see our base material, which is different, sort of regular looking gravel, and then we've got the fancier looking nice stone dust aggregate as a top coat. It's important to mention, as highlighted on the photo on the right, that moisture is really important for the compaction process. There isn't going to be, the ionic charge between particles that bind them together without moisture. So in order to get compaction rates higher, as high as you need them to be, we need to compact when there's moisture. So generally it's right after a rainstorm. Sometimes you get the benefit of a rainbow. Next slide. Sometimes it doesn't rain. And so there's a project we were working on this summer where it didn't rain for the 6 weeks when we needed it to. So we actually had to bring water in. So we went to a local pond that we could drive our UTV to, pump water into a tank, bring it to the trail and water the trail in order to get the compaction rates we needed. Took a lot longer, but it was necessary. Next slide. Then you finish the edges and naturalize. So you can see the difference between the stuff right in the foreground and right behind it. You go from a messy trail to a really clean looking path on the landscape. Next slide. Again, finishing the edges, and then we finish that off by taking all of that leaf litter that was raked off or at the start of the process, and we bring it right back into the trail edge. Next slide. And this is a photo of a completed trail, I think the day or within a couple days of finishing. So we try to make it look like it's been on the landscape for a real long time and have everything blend. Okay, next slide. Finally, we seed and mulch in some cases, not in every case. When we're in the woods and you don't want to import a seed source or you don't want to bring something in that wouldn't naturally be there, oftentimes we just use the native seed source that we've in the organic layer and mulch with leaf litter. Sometimes like in this picture, we're using Curlex fabric, Curlex blanket, excuse me, over imported seed. We weight it down with rocks because I personally don't like to keep it there forever. I like to just lay it down and pull it back up. There's this like green polypropylene that's woven through. It's supposedly photodegradable, but I prefer to just get it out of the landscape as soon as we start to see grass starting to sprout up through it. Next slide. This is what we prefer to use, just loose straw over seed. Next slide. This is a before and after. These pictures are taken about 2 weeks apart. So we finished the trail, seeded and mulched. We got a bunch of nice gentle rainstorms, and 2 weeks later, all of the soils were stabilized. That's the ideal scenario. Doesn't always happen exactly like that. Next slide. So just some real quick tips and advice. When you're laying out your trail, try not to push your grade limits. So those grade segments that Peter was talking about, if you're working in that area of like say 5% to 8 1/3% grade, don't lay your trail out at 8%, because if it goes to 8.5, you've pushed out that grade segment. And just through experience, I found that the trail you build is always just a little steeper than the trail you lay out. And to avoid those conundrums, don't push grade limits during the layout process. Next one. Source the best surfacing matrix that you can possibly find. So that's usually, we generally call it stone dust, but it's a 3/8 inch minus aggregate. It needs to be angular. It needs to have enough fines in it that really bind. Also some binders, so a little bit of clay content is good. I've been known to mix as many as 3 or 4 different types of aggregate together to create a surfacing matrix if a local quarry doesn't have something that I find suitable, because really the quality of the surfacing matrix can make or break your accessible trail. It's all about the drainage. Can't emphasize that enough. It's the way the water moves onto your trail, moves off the trail, acts when it's on your trail. Everything we do, we're focusing on the water, the immediate watershed of your trail. When there's any precipitation event, how is water getting on, how is water getting off, and what's it doing when it's on your trail. Can't emphasize that enough. It's easy to build an accessible trail. It's hard to build an accessible trail that drains really, really well. Beware of the shoulder seasons during construction. It's best not to be building during freeze-thaw cycles, because that really throws off your compaction. It also is usually when the weather is less predictable. Also, first thing in the spring, things tend to be really wet, although seed takes nicely then. Anything that you do very early season or very late season will probably need to be revisited a little bit later. Utilize the proper equipment. We generally use tracked equipment built for the task that's no wider than our finished trail during the construction. During maintenance, similarly, you want to make sure you're using equipment that's sized for your trail. Know the value of hand finishing. I think I emphasized that a little bit. It's every part of the process. It's clipping all the roots during the excavation. It's making sure that that roots are sawn. We have dedicated saws for roots, so that we're making as surgical a cut on every tree and branch as possible. Okay, and finally, plan on maintenance. Build maintenance budget into your trail project. Know that once it's constructed, you're going to have to continue that investment with both labor and hard costs in terms of getting out there, seeing it, adding some extra material, having that material on hand. We'll talk a little bit more about that in Tyler's section. And I think that's it. You can just skip this slide. This is a video, but I think for the sake of time, we can just move right on, Mariah.
Oh, hey, Tyler. We actually can't hear your audio. If you click on your microphone at the bottom left of your screen with the icon, there should be an ability to select your headset.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Thanks, Jed. We're going to talk about maintenance, but we thought that it might be a good idea to segue into that by talking about some considerations for modifying existing trails. for those of us that might have trails in our system that we want to increase accessibility on. Some appropriate modifications to these trails might include retrofitting current structures, like building in passing lanes, rebuilding a tread surface with appropriate materials. But sometimes trail conditions, there are reasons that some things can't be overcome, like current grades, soil composition of existing trails, and or the underlying soils and conditions. And we thought we'd kick some questions over to Peter and Jed about this modification concept. Jed, can you talk about converting existing trails into an accessible trail?
Sure, absolutely. We, as you know, I don't want to speak for Peter, but I get this question somewhat frequently, and the answer is, a resounding maybe. It really depends on a lot of different things. So there's certain elements that are pretty easy to retrofit or to modify. Examples might be like this: if the spacing of your deck boards on a boardwalk, for instance, were a little bit too wide, you might be able to fix that pretty easily. Like if it's spaced out an inch, you can bring that down to less than half an inch, or you could update your railing system so that it meets guidelines. So those are sort of pretty basic stuff, basic leveling of the tread. If going up the next level, I think, slightly more intensive improvements might be like what we see in the picture here. This is the before and after of a trail that we brought up to specifications. It was a pretty level trail. It just got massively overgrown. So what we did is we went through and we actually dug it out and installed the gravel, and then it brought it back up to compliance. But if you're dealing with a situation where your grades are too steep, and that you'd be doing a lot of like quick redesign, everything's a function of rise and run. And if you've got not enough rise and too much run to meet your requirements, that's just not something you can easily build yourself out of. That's a situation you should design yourself out of. So you probably need to look at, a redesign of that trail, and then once you do that, then it's like, all right, well, how much are we doing? A lot of little fixes, or should we just look at this trail as a whole and say, let's just design an accessible trail? So that kind of runs the gamut, I guess.
Great, thanks. Peter, what about maybe increasing accessibility as a broad term on trails that may not be able to meet all the specifications, but can still be opened up to more users? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So for example, you've got an existing trail, and there are areas along the trail where you might have not enough width, for example. And if you can actually remove one of the obstacles or both obstacles, let's say it's two stones or boulders, smaller things that you can shift out of the way, that might be something. One of the largest barriers on a trail are actually drainage structures, water bars, drainage diversions, things like that. You can convert a water bar into a drainage swale, and by using the slope specifications I talked about earlier, you could make that work and still, shunt water off the trail. Where it gets more challenging is when you have, for example, a trail on an old roadbed and the entire roadbed is entrenched. Then you're really challenged to try to, to change that. A lot of folks think that that's the easiest place to put a trail is on an old road. And the challenge there is that it's a road for a reason. It was designed or intended to be used as a road, not a trail. And so it has inherent issues, particularly drainage. And so that's where, what Jed was talking about, in terms of moving the trail off of that existing alignment to get it onto better grades. So the other thing to recall is that there are these exceptions that I spoke about earlier. Things like exceptions for surface, for example, and in the realm of surface, the standard is firm and stable. But if you've got some softer sections, maybe they're fine, in the summer when it's dry. But with a little bit of rain, they might get softer, but it's for a short distance. That's the kind of information you could also incorporate into your trailhead signage to indicate that, so that people know that that's what they're coming up against. It also depends on the type of user. If someone's using a power chair, the clearance on those power chairs is not very much. Whereas if it's a manual chair, lots of times there's more clearance. And so, your tread obstacles, whether there's stones or roots or things like that, there could be a number of those in the treadway, as long as you have, the maneuverability width to work around those. So that's another area where you can look at changing the experience on a section of trail like that. And we can keep going. I mean, there's lots of different options for doing this. But I think, as I've experienced, and I know Jed has as well, that, lots of folks start out with the idea of creating, something new. And it provides the greatest opportunity for, creating a really good experience. Taking an existing trail and converting it, you can do it. You just got to have the right situation and conditions to do that. Sort of the low-hanging fruit is the way I like to refer to it as.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the maintenance issues that we're seeing as a land trust that manages accessible trails. BNRC maintains or is restoring to specifications about a mile and a half or about 8,000 feet of accessible trail. The infrastructure on those trails includes bridges, boardwalks, and the transitions from those to surfacing, as well as all the different grades encompassed in those trails and the surfacing itself. Next slide. Some of the issues that we're seeing are the transitions between boardwalks and bridges and surfacing, encroachment of vegetation and or organic materials falling onto the trail and things like that. And then loss of that material, the surfacing material, through erosion, compaction, displacement. These photos down on the bottom here show one of our efforts to help restore some of those bridge transitions on one of our accessible trails. Next slide. So what we're working through right now is thinking about our takeaways as we've been managing these trails, that we need to develop a specific maintenance plan for trails that we're maintaining to these accessibility standards. That means that adding to our logistical capacity, but also making space in our stewardship philosophy. What's a reasonable expectation of accessibility? Different styles and types of trails have a different expectation, and there needs to be an expectation of full access of these trails, as opposed to an expectation that there might be a muddy section or blowdown or some other type of barrier. It's also important for trail conditions in the field to accurately match the information that we're sharing about them on our website and in some of these resource materials like the Trails for All guide. So some of the things that we're building into our trails program are increasing our rate of monitoring and inventorying these trails, and that allows us to respond to the trail condition changes that affect accessibility. Having material available for the gravel surfacing for small projects, we found that it's a challenge to source material quickly and in small amounts, so having a stockpile is useful. And then addressing needs for equipment, efficiently moving and compacting surfacing materials. And with that discussion about equipment, we're going to again turn to our experts about some more questions for maintenance. So with that, Peter, how much maintenance could we expect to have year over year on an accessible trail?
That's a great question, Tyler. So it really depends. You know, for example, if you're going through an open area, okay, you've got the amount of light that's there, the grasses that are growing there. So, you know, probably monthly mowing on either side of the treadway. You know, there's a variety of reasons. You know, some folks feel like, you know, getting rid of that taller grass along the side makes trail users more comfortable because of, you know, the potential for ticks. You know, from a overall maintenance standpoint, in terms of, you know, invasion of vegetation, you know, making sure that the seed source is not, you know, flopping in over the edges onto the surfacing. How you mow those areas is also critical. You know, whether you're using a walk behind machine or a ride on type of machine, you always want to be blowing the cut material away from the treadway, just to minimize the amount of potential for seed to get onto the treadway. You know, so in a woodland setting, you know, you're always going to have you know, debris coming down from overhead, you know, whether it's a whole tree, you know, blowing down, or branches, you know, so there's that kind of thing. And I think that you don't need to get, you know, completely anal about trying to make sure the trail is open all the time. These are natural events, and, you know, trail users expect that to occur. And, you know, I have met folks in wheelchairs that have come along and they've kind of moved the branches out of the way because they, you know, want to continue on. And they have the ability to do that. Now, that's not everybody, but having a regular, you know, way of learning about these kinds of situations, you know, again, through Trailhead information, you know, having folks take a picture and emailing it to you, so you know, is it a 6-inch tree or is it just a branch across the trail? When they say the trail's blocked, what are we going to do, kind of thing. So there's a number of different you know, tasks that can be done, and they can be either done, you know, via volunteers who are trained to do this. I think the biggest sort of longer term maintenance item would be the surface itself. You know, a tree comes down, breaks off and comes down and lands in the middle of the treadway and creates a, you know, a hole. Things like that. That's you know, something that needs to be addressed, and that's where you're talking about, you know, having the right equipment, the materials on site to be able to fix things like that, the knowledge how to do it. So that probably.
Jed, can you talk about maybe some of like that equipment that might be kind of a first step into that level of maintenance?
Certainly. I think that was pretty exhaustive answer that Peter gave. Was great. No, good. Like, and so what do we need to fix that sort of cadre of problems that may happen, right? Like, well, the mowers, obviously, if you're maintaining something that goes through a field, the mowers are one, and having a maintenance schedule and the ability to move those mowers around. But at a minimum, you need a wheelbarrow and a shovel. But that might get a little daunting if you're in the situation that, you know, BNRC is in, with 8,000 lineal feet of accessible trail. I'm assuming averages 5 to 6 feet wide. So we kind of need to scale up a little from there. Oftentimes, once you get, once you have inherited a trail system and the maintenance of it, I'd say, the short list of equipment to be a good steward would be, your hand tools, your rakes, your shovels, a landscape rake, to really be able to grade out nicely, and then probably a plate compactor, like you see in the photo on the right. One about that size, weighs 200 to 300 pounds. It can be pretty easily moved around. You can rent them as well, but they're not always there when you need them. And I know that some of the land trusts here in my state of Maine, they're buying some of this equipment and knowing that they can lend it out to other organizations. So you might have one plate compactor that bounces around Berkshire County, or gets over to the Pioneer Valley, and the and all the different managing agencies know that it's out there. That's one good way to sort of cut costs. And then you need a way to bring some surfacing in. So you have regular wheelbarrows. That can be a hard sell for volunteers if they have to push, a wheelbarrow or carry buckets up a hillside for 1,000 or 2,000 feet. So then we often look at like some sort of power wheelbarrow. So that could be either a tracked wheelbarrow or like a DR power wagon that has wheels. There's one made by Yard Max, which is not really one that you see commercially used that much by professionals, but they sell it at Home Depot and it would be fine for a week or two at a time. There's a number of brands out there. I personally encourage clients that have sizable, accessible trails to invest in something like a side-by-side, a UTV, like a John Deere Gator, or like a Can-Am Defender, that have hydraulically dumped beds. They can carry 1,500 or 2,000 pounds at a time. They're on wheels, so they can get out quickly. They're nimble, and they don't leave marks like tracked equipment does when they're turning on trails. And they could all be used for a variety of things, for getting the tools out. And you're not generally dealing with moving tremendous amounts of aggregate, but you want to be able to address situations on an as needed basis. And so a UTV is something that can really fill a lot of different roles in trail maintenance. I also have actually just got rid of a Japanese mini truck that's very similar. You have hydraulic dump beds; they're a little skinnier. That's a similar sort of thing. Or an ATV with a dump trailer. You see a lot of people using that, can work as well, but it's definitely not nearly as nimble, and turning them around can be a bit of a challenge. So, I think that's sort of the level. And then if you need something more than that for maintenance, perhaps consider looking into a maintenance contract with a local professional who could come in with the mini excavator and the skid steer and the drum roller and all that other stuff for like a few days here and a few days there. And I think that's probably going to be a better investment than trying to procure all and maintain all that equipment.
Awesome. Thanks, Jed. I could pick your brains all day about maintenance, but I'm going to turn it back to Mariah now and to the larger group for any other questions.
Thank you. Yeah, thank all of you for all the great information you're sharing. We have a little bit of time left and would love to hear from our participants. If you have a question, we have a small enough group that you could raise your virtual hand and I can allow the settings so you can ask the question yourself, or feel free to pop it into the Q&A, and I'm happy to facilitate that. Right, I see Josh. All right, here we go. Should be able to ask now. Thanks.
Howdy, friends. It's been a while. Nice to see you. I wonder if you could talk about a sometimes overlooked aspect of trail building that I know I've talked with Jed and Peter about in the past, which is sustainability for employees, for trail workers. I wonder if you could talk about the long haul. I know both of you and myself are in it for the long haul. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Go ahead, Jed.
All right. Yeah, nice to see your face, Josh. I guess just to ask a clarifying question, what exactly do you mean by sustainability? Like, you mean retention, or do you mean physical sustainability, like being able to do the work for years?
Wow, good clarifier. There's so many ways we could take this. Obviously, both are of interest.
Yeah.
We could talk about prevailing wage. There's a lot of ways we could take this. Whatever speaks to you to answer, I would say.
I think in terms of retention, that's an ongoing issue, and every single trail contractor that I know is struggling to find the size of crew that they would like to ideally have, myself included. The industry of trail building as a, and the recreation industry is exploding on a level that's wild, and so there's a lot of opportunity for construction projects, and it's really hard work. So it's hard to keep people that want to do that going year after year after year. So I think from my perspective, I try to vary up my projects a lot, so you're not doing the same thing. If you have an intern crew that you're hiring seasonally, you've got to probably understand that someone who's coming on as an intern for a land trust or conservation trust it's probably a stepping stone for them, and they may be a season or two and moving on. So adjust the work accordingly, make it fun, but realize that that's probably going to be the general scenario, and try not to physically overwork folks. I mean, they might find that they want field work to be their end all, and that's what they want to stay in the field. And that's wonderful when you find folks that are excited to do that. But that will only last until their first big injury, usually, And so being very mindful of body mechanics, the amount of the type of work they're doing, and equipping them with the right, obviously like PPE, personal protective equipment, the right tools for the job, and making constant check-ins, safety checks, and just basic check-ins, and varying their work routines so that they're using different parts of their body are all sort of critical. I know we were just on a project where there was a lot of that just came off of a few weeks ago, that we were digging a lot of brand new trail in an environment south of here. And we basically decided to switch it up, that we were using a lot of volunteer labor, that we said every Wednesday, we're going to just do something else. We're going to carry bog bridging off to that other site. Or we're going to work on a carpentry project or fix this or something, so that they were middle of the week, they weren't bent over benching. They got a little bit of a break from that. So they weren't doing more than 2 days in a row. So little techniques like that might help in the short term. Does that help?
I can add a couple of other things, Josh. Jed covered a lot of good things there. And I think also to add to the right tools, also having the right training. Not all training is appropriate training necessarily. When I say right training, I'm thinking more in terms of, working efficiently. That goes back to what Jed was talking about in terms of body mechanics. For example, we do a lot of rock work. And so being able to move rocks efficiently with your body and the tools that you use is really important, because if you're doing it all day for, multiple days at a time, and that's all there is on that particular project, you really got to be, conscious of how your body is reacting to what you're doing. And along with that, one of the things that I have been doing now for years, and that's really stretching, just having your body be in as limber and good a shape as possible. That's what's allowed me to continue doing this. It's just a fact of life that we, not everybody is has the abilities, to do the strenuous stuff. And again, I like what Jed was saying there in terms of varying the work and finding the right type of work for the person as well. And having happy folks doing trail work is going to keep them in that kind of work longer.
Thank you.
All right, we have one other person who has raised their hand, and then we'll move to the question in the chat. So John, I'm gonna look to you.
Hi, John Berg. I'm with the Nature Conservancy in Rhode Island. Really just an observation, yes, the demand for these trails has really grown. We're seeing more and more people who want to get out on these preserves. We're in southern Rhode Island, and what you had said, Jedediah, about trying to stay off the ground during this shoulder season is key, especially here. We've got a long way down to any mineral soil, and we've found the hard way that getting people out onto these preserves without the proper investment up front has really created a mess for us to try to improve and backfill, and that seems to be exasperated and exacerbated by trying to get contractors out into these areas during this very short window. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I think it's a challenge for us to find enough local help to help manage all these places and bring them up to the standard that people would like to see happen. So this has been eye-opening for me to hear this discussion. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, John. I think a lot of us trail builders, we've been searching for ways to clone ourselves, but we haven't found that opportunity.
We do know it involves beards and flannel shirts, though. I don't know if you picked up on that.
I've had a couple young guys come to me recently who are very interested. So I don't know if they're on this call, but if it's recorded, I know they'll watch it.
That's great. Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think on that point. Oh, go ahead, Mariah.
I was just gonna say we'll be sending the recording out post conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, the call for training is really pretty overwhelming too. I used to spend a lot more time going around teaching, giving workshops. That's how I met Josh. But now with that has risen the need to actually be out there building. So I have a hard time balancing it all. I'm saying no to a lot of opportunities. And I know there's a lot of people that are looking for good construction-based workshops surrounding this. And I think if you're in a position to play into the last question also of trying to give your employees, interns, your seasonal workers something to look forward to, being able to offer some sort of a workshop or training is really appealing. And so seeking out those opportunities whenever you can is a wonderful thing. So just a plug for those of you, I'm sure almost everybody knows, but if you visit the American Trails website, it's a really good clearinghouse for trainings and workshops and things that are being done. It's a great way to link to opportunities, as well as the annual Professional Trail Builders Association conference. This year it's going to be in Reno, Nevada, which is pretty far away. But also partnering with American Trails. And then hopefully it'll be a little closer to the East Coast next year. But there's always nice workshops that are being, and great presentations and sessions that are really informative at those symposiums.
One thing I'd like to add to that is that something I'm exploring for this year is to actually use some of our projects and actually bring folks in, for a couple of days or something like that, and use that as a training site, because it's a real live project, and there's an opportunity for folks to learn about what's going on. Of course, that's going to involve acceptance by the client as well to do something like that. But it's another potential venue, and like I said, I'm exploring that idea for this year on a couple of projects.
Awesome. Thank you both. And thanks, John. Someone also put a plug in for the Mass Trails Conference as well. So we'll move on to a question in the chat by Jean. Is there an ideal thickness for the matrix layer? Jed, you mentioned that it was ideal to compact 6 inches at a time. 2 or 3 times 6 inches is 12 inches to 18 inches. I hadn't realized that layer would be that thick.
Yeah, well, Peter can definitely weigh in on this as well. And I should have, I guess I misspoke a little bit. It's really 4 to 6 inches of the layers you should be compacting in, 6 inches a maximum. So sometimes we're compacting in 4 inches at a time, or even 3, depending if we're switching aggregate types. In general, the way that I personally like to construct accessible trails, we average across all of the ones that I've done, and I keep data on it, about 12 inches of depth. And the last one I did, we averaged almost 18 because of the soil types there. And so I personally am not willing to compromise generally in terms of like the depth to which we need to excavate. And you see that in the final product. There's a much larger, well, not a much, there's a significant upfront cost to utilizing more aggregate, but it doesn't take that much longer to install. The labor isn't that much more. It's really it's mostly just the cost of the gravel, which is a one-time thing. And then you've got that much more mass of an inorganic matter for that trail bed. So there's less encroachment from the sides and significantly less to almost nil from below. You see a lot of, I have seen personally a lot of these trails that have been built on, sort of shoestring budgets where you just throw down 3 inches of gravel on top of the landscape, and in a year it's just grown up in weeds. And so if you look at the cost of having to redo that versus the cost of adding a thicker layer from the outset, your long-term cost is going to be a lot lower by trying to build it, to a basically roughly, I'd say minimum 8 inches, but I usually average about 12 of depth.
Yeah, I can echo, Jed's comments on that. The soil types are really what's going to drive this. And the other piece that drives it is, having to make the grades, so to speak, the running slopes. We face that a lot of times where we actually have to build, downhill cribbing to support the lower side of the treadway. And we might be filling up to, perhaps 2, sometimes even 3 feet of material, typically crushed stone. That gets compacted in there behind that until we get up to, close to where the surfacing would be installed. And then having the geotextile, non-woven geotextile underneath the good stuff, the surfacing, to separate. That's the beneficial method that we like to use.
Great, thanks. I think we've got time for this one last question from Kathy. If you are adapting an existing trail with substantial trees along it that have roots in the treadway, what is the best way to keep those trees healthy while also creating that appropriate surface? Filling in without cutting, cutting and filling, or should the trail really be rerouted?
I'm willing to jump in on that one. The first question I would ask is, what are the soils underneath these roots or these trees? Okay, I'll give a quick example. Years ago, we did an accessible trail in a state forest, and we had an excavator on site. We were, working along, and then we got to this stand of spruce trees that had actually been planted by the CCCs. And the organic material was at least 18 inches deep, all built up needle litter over the years. We ended up hand excavating through there because there's this huge matrix of tree roots. And then what we ended up doing was we ended up replacing that organic material with crushed stone. And we overfilled over top of the roots with the crushed stone and then the geotextile. So what we essentially created was aeration for the roots underneath. At the same time, we're creating structure, to support the trail treadway. And that's something that could be, you know, done in that particular situation. It depends a little bit on the soil type. You know, I mean, if it's a wetter soil, which I suspect if the roots are, you know, that many roots are on the surface, you know, some of that stone is going to get, you know, sort of will sink down into the poorer soil. So some hand excavation would likely be needed there before you start, you know, down to some firmer soil. Lots of times, you know, the top 6 inches or so is mixed with organics, and so it's really poor quality. But if you can get rid of that and then get down to some good solid mineral soil and then build up with, you know, crushed stone around the roots, you're providing the aeration to the tree roots, and you're essentially floating the treadway on top of that. So that's, you know, that would be my take on that. I don't know what Jed's thoughts are on that one.
No, I think you answered it really, really well, Peter. I would say what we try not to do is tear up the roots and leave them all mangled, right? And we try not to compact like a highly compactable aggregate tightly around trees and around those roots. So there's a variety of ways to try to approach it without doing those things. And I think what Peter spelled out is definitely a labor intensive way to do it, but is about the best, if not the best. So, you know, allowing some aeration around those roots is pretty critical. If you have to, you inevitably have to cut roots to build a trail. And so we try to make those cuts as surgical as possible so that the roots can heal. I personally would rather, if I have to take out a root, I'd rather take it out and cut it cleanly than compact around it and watch it die slowly and possibly have something move up into that tree, because it'll hopefully heal that scar, as opposed to leaving something that, you know, that is going to infect the tree later. But I think ideally, pointing at what Peter said, like if there's any way, basically what kills them is compacting around those roots really tightly. So anything you can do to minimize that is going to be beneficial.
Kathy's other question was, you know, relocating that, and, you know, it depends on the terrain. You know, what are the abilities of relocation in that particular spot? I can think that if you know, if it's relatively flat terrain, and you try to go around a section like that, unless it's quite open, you're going to still experience encountering roots. And so if you've already got an impacted area, you know, of an existing trail with lots of roots, you know, you have to make that decision. Maybe you're better off spending the time, you know, putting in that crushed stone versus trying to go around and then having to, you know, excavate and encounter those roots and then having to cut those roots. So it's a site-specific kind of decision that has to be made for that situation.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we're at the end of our time here. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for our presenters, for sharing your time and expertise. I'm sure they're going to be singing your praises in the chat, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you also to our attendees. I'll be sure to send the recording and the resources that were mentioned, you know, the places to seek training and that sort of thing in a follow-up email, as well as the resources and recording from part 1 if you missed that. I'll also share, if you have any questions that you weren't able to get to tonight, please email them to me. I'll be compiling them and sharing them with our presenters for their responses when they have the time. All right, I think that's it for tonight. Thanks so much.